we know that it's so important to talk to our clients, focusing on their pains and using our service to tell them how to solve their pains. But the next question is, how do I know what kind of pains my clients have or my prospective clients have? Most likely, you have not even had a chance to get in front of them. You're trying to build a relationship. They're not going to just tell you out loud that these are the pains they have. So, how do you know the client's pains before you even meet with them? And how do you tie your services to those pains? Today, we're going to be talking all about business pains. Stay tuned if you want to know more about how to discover your prospects' business pains and use it to sell to them and to build that relationship. Stay tuned. For those people who still do not know me yet, my name is Melinda Chen. I'm the founder of Women Making Big Sales. We're here to help small entrepreneurs sell to big clients, and that is our goal here. So for this episode, like I said, we're going to be talking about business pains. And the first thing is, a lot of my clients, when they meet with me or when they start working with me, they're amazed by how fast I am able to understand the prospect's pains and really verbalize it and tie the solutions to those pains. The reality is that I have been selling for 15 years, so I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen a lot of companies. I've pitched to a lot of companies, and regardless of where the companies are in the world or which industries they belong to, there are some very general, big topic, common business pains that many companies struggle with, because these are the toughest problems to deal with. Even the biggest companies, Fortune 500 um, companies, they still struggle with similar problems. And that's really how I'm able to really identify these problems very fast. Before we start talking about the problems, I would like to share with you or talk about symptoms of the problems. What do you mean by symptoms of the problems? That's actually quite important. For example, imagine if your client is having, let's say, a cold. Might not necessarily know that this particular client is having a cold. However, if your client or your prospective client is having symptoms of the cold, you can guesstimate or you can assume or guess that this prospect is having having a cold. For example, if the prospect is sniffing, is having watery eyes, coughing a lot, and sneezing a lot, or taking pain medicines, these are the symptoms that show that a prospect is having a cold. This is similar to discovering the business pains. We also need to understand the similar symptoms that might a prospect might have when they're having specific business pains. So that's very important. While we might not necessarily know what the pains they're experiencing, we could find the pain symptoms, and based on the symptoms, we could try to understand their potential business pains. So let's try to discover a few business pains, and I'll share with you potential symptoms that might exhibit, and that will give you indication or clues that your prospect is having specific pains. So the first thing that I want to share with you is internal pains. There are different kinds of internal pains, especially when it comes to big companies. Internal pains, one a very common internal pains would be conflicts between departments. So there's always political conflicts. No matter where we go, we tend to find this kind of conflict everywhere in the world. So we're talking about conflicts between departments, conflicts between department heads. For example, a very common conflicts we often see is director of sales versus director of marketing. They always have a conflict between the two. So if you're selling to director of sales, you might be, this potential pain they're having might be, the pains that's comes from the marketing. So, for example, if you're a marketing manager and you're trying to sell something that would help them increase sales, you might want to think about the conflict or innate conflict between sales and marketing. There's also always conflict between sales and operation. Operation people want to do things a certain way, but sales people, they only want to get clients. And these are the conflicts, unfortunately or fortunately for us, happens in any companies or any industries. What are the symptoms of these pains? If you see that, hey, companies, they are trying to, the salespeople is trying to target specific industry, but their marketing product or their marketing content, their blog, social media is showing completely different. You might be able to see that, hey, there's a disconnect between the two. You can also see that, hey, the position of those departments, what are their background? If you see somebody, a VP of sales that only got a lot of sales background, but or VP of marketing got only marketing background, and there's a very seemingly disconnect between the two departments, you might be able to assume that, hey, there could be a disconnect between sales and marketing or between different departments. So that's one thing. Communication could always be a conflict, and this happens a lot, especially if you're a leadership coach or you're in HR. There could always be a communication, especially if you see somebody who has more a technical background. If you're trying to sell to a decision maker and the decision maker has a more technical background, but they also have to deal a lot with people and communication. This often happens when it comes to communication challenge. And what happens to communication? Communication challenge will lead to sales challenge or operational challenge, or even huge turnover, so HR challenges. So these are the things you could think about. And internal challenge, another one that you could see is hitting the deadline. And that is also very, very common situation. If you're trying to sell to, for example, IT companies or a lot of marketing or product companies, they often have deadline. IT companies have deadline in terms of integration, IT integrations. And, I've worked with a lot of clients, and there are huge clients, but there's always deadline problems. There's always problems with being too late and not be able to hit the schedule and hit the dates, and that could be a challenge. So think about that when it comes to deadline challenge. If you work with teams that has a lot of deadline, look at their, the past projects. If you can find it online, the past projects. Do you see any delays, or if they have product launches? You look at their social media. If you're a social media or marketing manager, look at the fact that whether, do they have kind of inconsistent social media posting towards the end of the product launch? That might be indication of deadline. So hitting the deadline and having that challenge. So these are some examples of internal challenges. And some other examples of external challenges that you could think about. The one big thing is always the competition. Everybody is thinking about what their competitors are doing. So if you see that one competitor, somebody in the industry that is doing extremely well, then think beyond that. Then think that, hey, their competitors, the other smaller ones, might be feeling the pressure to reach their sales goal. So you might be able to reach other people because they are feeling the pressure of the competition. So competition is amazing pains that you can always look at. Look at what companies are doing, especially if you're very focused in terms of industry. Then, look at the competitions, who are hurting, who are being affected, and how can you help them solve the problems. I always tell my clients, whenever you're doing research, keep repeating this sentence. And that's a very important sentence. How can I help my prospect or my clients solve the problems and capture the opportunities? And that is very important. Think about that. Every research you're doing, be creative and be thoughtful, and think about, how can I help them solve the problems and capture opportunities? So whenever you're doing research or looking online, keep thinking about that. Another external challenges would be regulation changes. If it's a company that's that's facing a lot of changes in terms of regulation, technology changes, or regulation in terms of the government is forcing them to pass certain audit or do certain kinds of regulatory compliance, and how can you help them solve the problems and capture the opportunities? So always think about, hey, the industry, every single industry, especially the bigger they are, the more regulations there are. And we're talking about, especially in banking and also in accounting, those industries tend to have a lot of regulatory regulations imposed. So that could be one thing. And technology changes could happen a lot, especially when if you're a marketing manager and you're trying to go after clients. There's constant change in terms of new technology, implementing the new technology, and I think that's something that you might want to consider. And these are probably, I'm trying to give up a lot of content. uh, Feel free, just write down the things, write down a couple of things you have in mind that comes up to mind, and then you can also send me a message and say, hey, these are what I'm thinking about. What do you think they're fit? Do you think they're relevant? Do you think they're focused enough? I know I'm giving you a lot of content, but I want to share with you as many examples as possible, so hopefully that'll inspire you to think about potential business challenges. If you, and that's at the end, now we're closing, but I still want to share with you a last exercise that you can use when you're trying to understand your clients business pains, is that just imagine yourself being your decision maker. For example, if you're trying to sell CEO, imagine yourself being the CEO and arriving in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, and think about what are the most important business priorities that this particular CEOs need to tackle. So what are the most important thing that he would be thinking about at 8 o'clock in the morning? What would be the potential meetings? Who will he be meeting in order to capture those problems or capture those opportunities or solve those problems? So that'll be a useful mental exercise for you. And also think about, who are the people this particular CEO or your decision maker will be working with. For example, CEOs, they tend to work with all the director of sales, director of marketing. He's tend to have to juggle between everybody's different among departments' priorities. And those are the things that he has to juggle with. He has to face a conflict among different departments. So visualize it, be creative, dream, think about it, however you want to call it. But try to have an assumption, think of a business pains, and look for clues, look for symptoms to justify, to confirm those pains. All right, I hope this is helpful for you, and that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And to your big sales, and we'll talk next time.